the important thing is that we kind of congratulate Mannix for our work well done on this, to summarize all the work that he's done with us. And it's nice that we also have people not from HKU, from Effective Altruism Hong Kong, because the way that we started working together on things is because a shift in direction in my courses from what was traditionally open science, judgment decision making, more towards trying to do more good in the world. So doing more good and doing good better. And Mannix took one of the first classes that I did in shifting everything to effective altruism and running this second time this year. And it's nice because Mannix decided after taking that course that he wants to do a thesis about effective altruism. And not only has he been able to complete this as a registered report in this amazing initiative called Peer Community and Registered Report, which means that his plan was submitted to a journal, to the community, got some feedback, and then received an in-principle acceptance. But his work has been the foundation for all that my students are doing this semester. So basically, we took his design and some of his extensions, and all of the students are doing something very similar. He also gave us like a nice tutorial to help the students with this. So I'm hoping he can share a little bit of his experience, both about the experiment and the design and the replications and open science and effective altruism, and also about a little bit more of the directions of what it means to publish something as an undergraduate student, to do a thesis as part of peer community in registered reports. So we haven't had a chance to do a lot of summaries together. So I'm looking forward to hearing from you, your perspective. Thank you.
Okay, so this is my a little presentation basically about the thesis that I did with Philly here, and it's the topic is a bit complicated: revisiting heuristics and biases in charity in an RNA of Feldman and Szymanska, but it's the basic concept is actually not that hard. So. For an overall background of this topic, basically. So, well, some people like to donate money to charities. So if you donate money to a charity, I assume the whole point of you doing so is to, well, help people, right? Why are you donating money to charities if you don't want to help people? So that's our usual assumption of thinking about things. So I donate some money and then I help somebody in some way that we can measure. But do people actually just donate money just to help people? Or do they have other considerations in mind when they do so? So there are not just some, but lots of studies on why people donate money to other people, to donate money to others in need. So one of the literature reviews that are the most influential is this paper, Beckers and Weeking from 2011, and it categorizes the reasons why individual people donate. And as you can see, it isn't just one single. There isn't just one single reason. There are, as they categorized, 8 different reasons why somebody would want to donate money to other people. And you can see that the fourth, altruism, is only one of the reasons why a person would donate money to others. But they may be also affected by other considerations, such as, do they feel like donating money makes a difference? Does helping the given beneficiary fit their own moral values? Or does donating money to other people actually make them feel happy or affect their social status among their peers? So there's not just the single consideration of whether donating can actually measurably help a beneficiary, but there are also other concerns that people have when they donate money to others. So the basic design of my study is a replication of Baron and Szymanska, which is a book chapter from 2011. Basically, how they define whether a person is donating effectively is by using a utilitarian model. It's a kind of economic model for what the best way to donate money is, by using a maximum cost effectiveness, which is to say that per X amount of money donated to a beneficiary, the amount of measurable good that is done is maximized. So let's say if there are 2 charities, a charity A and a charity B, and they do the same amount of good for the same amount of money, there is no difference in cost effectiveness between the two. So maybe the type of good that they do is different, or maybe the way that they do good may be slightly different. But if they do the same amount of good, and use the same amount of money in doing so, then there is no tangible difference between the two. And the reason why you might want to pick one over the other or prefer one over the other must be due to some sort of other influence, another type of bias that can influence this decision. So the way I study these biases is through a replication and extensions of a previous study. So just to explain what replications are. So there's been what has been called a replication crisis in science. Many studies, in a very basic sense, are found not to work when tried again. So maybe an author publishes a study claiming a really big effect size in X manipulation. But later somebody comes along and does a replication. Basically, they do the same thing again in a very simplified sense. And then they find that, hey, this doesn't have an effect size at all, or maybe the effect size is actually the opposite of what we found before. And this phenomenon, although present in basically all the sciences, is particularly prevalent in social psychology. One related example is that one of the big names in social psychology, Dan Ariely and Francis Gino, had a scandal over manipulating data before, and where they were accused of manipulating data and a study over honesty nudging, where putting a signature about whether you will tell a lie in a certain document or not, the position of that signature has an effect on whether you're actually honest or not. So they were accused of fabricating data in this sense. So there has been a movement to try and replicate popular studies to verify them. And there aren't really that many drawbacks to them, right? Because if you verify a popular study and you find that there is still an effect there, then, well, good. Then we have actually given more evidence to the study that that's actually true. But if it turns out that the study doesn't replicate, then we can see that, hey, there is a problem here. We need to figure out what that problem is, and that can give us further direction to research. So these replications are also most often given with a greater sample size. So maybe the original study only has like 50 participants, then we might multiply that by a few times. One suggestion is 2.5 to make sure that this study doesn't just have an effect size because of random chance, or it decreases the chance that there's an error due to having a low sample size. So what are extensions? So extensions are additional study hypotheses tacked onto the side of a replication that do not affect the replication itself. So maybe I have a questionnaire with lots of questions that I ask a participant, and I can basically add perhaps one or two more questions at the end that won't affect how the participant answers the first few questions, but those extra questions can also reveal something in addition to the replication. Basically, it's like a mini study that you tack on to the end of somebody else's study to discover more effects that some manipulation might have. Okay, so the basic design of the study is like this. So we have two charities. We call them Charity A and Charity B. And both of these studies have, both of these charities have an equal cost effectiveness. So on average, Charity A and Charity B do the same amount of good for the same amount of money the participant gives to them. So if I say like, our charity receives $10,000, they might be able to save 100 children. And the only difference between the two is a certain manipulation that does not affect the cost effectiveness, but it affects something else about these two charities. So we ask participants, given that you have X amount of money to donate, how much money will you donate to each charity? So basically, we take this and we give this as a questionnaire to many participants in the US and have them compare these two charities and see which one they prefer. So our main statistical test is simply using a one sample t-test to see if the distribution of money that the participants chose between A and B are different from the proper 50% to each charity difference. So to validate different types of constructs, to make sure that we are actually measuring the thing that we're trying to measure, we have lots of different versions of the same hypothesis. And this is to check that we actually have validity over different framings of the question. So we also use a few ANOVA and PAIR t-tests later, which I'll discuss later. So this is the main instruction we gave to our participants in our questionnaire, that this study is about contributions to worthy causes, such as helping people in need who can't help themselves, like the young or those who are ill. We told participants to imagine that they weren't one of these needy people, and in fact, they have enough money to make that it's easy for them to give away some of their money to causes without seriously hurting their quality of life. So this is to ensure that people don't respond to questions just randomly because they think they don't have enough money to donate to other people, or due to other factors similar to those. So they were also told that, imagine that they were willing to contribute some of their annual income to such causes. So by putting annual income there, we're telling them that this isn't like a one-off thing that you can just randomly choose, but this is an actual decision that you will affect like future years and not just right now. We also told them that all programs mentioned are equally effective and efficient, except when we mention otherwise, just to make sure that this manipulation does work. Okay, so we have 5 different replication hypotheses that we took from Barron and Szymanska, and this is the first one, perceived waste. So we asked participants if charities perceived to be wasteful affect donation allocation. So we gave them 2 charities, a charity A and a charity B. We told them that both of these charities prevent 5 deaths for every $1,000 donations. However, we also told them that A spends $200 out of every $1,000 on advertising, while B spends $100. So these two charities have the same cost effectiveness in that when you donate $1,000 to them, they turn those $1,000 into 5 lives saved. So this holds for both A and B. It's just that what they decide to spend it on, that's different. But if you are the one donating to them, then from your perspective, these 2 are basically the same because they still save 5 people for $1,000 donations. But people will disagree with that and say that they would prefer that money will be donated to charity B, which is the charity that uses $100 on advertisements. So charities perceived to be more wasteful actually are preferred by almost a plurality of our participants, and they, on average, allocated about 75% of their money in donations to charity B, and this was a really significant result, and that replicated the original study. We also had different framings of these questions, and those also turned out to be significant as well. Okay, so this is hypothesis 2, which is about past costs. So we asked participants whether they found that charities that have high past costs affect their donation allocation. So again, we gave them 2 charities, a charity A and a charity B. Well, both charities A and B provide 5 deaths for every $10,000 in new donations, which means that their cost effectiveness right now is the same. We also told them that A was much more expensive to get started. So the cost per life saved on average is higher for A instead of B because A has spent more money than total. But by careful reading of the question, you can see that both A and B will save the same amounts of lives if you give them the same amounts of money now. So it doesn't matter whether A or B had used more money while trying to set up, because you're right here, not in the past, right? So if you're here donating money now, then the only thing that actually matters is how many lives can be saved if you give them a sum of money. So this is something that should be quite self-evident, I suppose, but also there are a significant amount of people who disagree with this. And about 60% of money was allocated to B in this sense. And although the effect size is a bit smaller than the past, we also see a significant increase in the allocation between A and B, which means that there are a significant amount of people who think that money should be donated to the charity who spent less on getting set up instead. And there are a significant amount of people who think that we shouldn't donate as much money to the charity who spent more money to set up, basically. Okay, so our third replication hypothesis is diversification. So we asked participants if they would donate more than nothing to a less effective charity. We have an example item here. So charity A can save one life for $10,000, while B can save one life for more money than that, $12,500. So the people helped are from the same group with the same problems. So the only difference here is that one can save one life for cheaper and one is more expensive. So given this sort of situation, well, the cost effectiveness kicks in and we say that we should donate all of our money to A, because for every $5 you're giving to B, $1 is wasted basically in comparison to A, because, for example, if you give this amount of money, $12,500 to B, basically what you're doing is wasting $2,500 on something that you could help another person with that, right? So instead of saving, for example, 4 people charity B, you can instead have taken that money to A and saved 5 people instead. So if you count the cost like that, you can see that actually wasting money on B can actually be detrimental to perhaps saving one life if you have enough money. So the logical response would be to give all money to A and to waste less money on B. But there still are people who think that we should still give a significant amount of money to charity B, and there are actually some people who think that they would decide to give all of their money to the more wasteful charity, and there are about maybe 10% of people who would say that they would allocate their own money to both A and B equally. So in total, there's an average of about 18% of money, or 18 to 19% of money that is donated to the less effective charity, and this is also a really significant effect here. Right. So how about when the less effective charity runs several different projects? So we try to split the bill even a bit more, and we tell the participants that we have 2 other charities, A and B, where A puts all the money into one project, which has a 75% chance of helping many different children, while B puts the money into several different projects, but each one of them only has a 70% chance of helping the children. But this, in this case, actually putting all of your money into A is still the more effective way of helping people, because even though there might still be a chance there should be a higher chance of helping some people if you put all of your money into B, but overall the odds factor together in that A is still in terms of probability, A is still the one which you want to basically put all of your money into, because that still gives better odds, even though there's only the one chance. So this actually makes them donate even more money to B, because they probably, my hypothesis is that they don't want to take on such risk due to lots of risk aversion. And on average, only about 30-something% of people actually decide to go all in and put all their money on A. All of the rest would like to hedge their bets a bit, so to speak, and donate some money to B. My hypothesis is that because they want to feel like that at least they'll be able to do something, and they would want to have a more certain chance of helping less people than they want to have a less certain chance of helping more people, even though the latter is actually better in comparison. And this, in this case, they have 31.09% money towards the less effective charity. Okay. So on to hypothesis 4, which is the in-group effect. So this is actually one of the most simple questions. So we simply asked participants outright if they would allocate more money to their in-group. For example, we have 2 charities, A and B. A, which helps children in their own country, and B, which helps children around the world, and they're equally needy. So there isn't like a question about whether children in perhaps India or something are on average more poor and thus deserving of more help. We tell them that, hey, they're equally needy. So this is simply a straight on choice of your country or everybody in the world. And well, yeah, there were about like 15% or so of people who said that, yeah, I'm just going to give all of my money to the kids in my country, and I'm not going to give anything to kids in the world. And the average allocation was about 40% to the charity which helps kids around the world. And this kind of really shows that even though it's a really blatant question, like I'm just straight up asking them if you want to donate to the kids in your country over the rest of the world, there's still like we can still see an effect in that people will still want to donate to kids in their own country. We also did another version where we actually gave them different locations to choose from. For example, we gave them India, Eastern Europe, China, and Africa. And we asked them if they wanted to donate money to kids in these locations over their own country, the US. So in all four of these examples, they wanted to donate money, obviously, to the kids in their own country over the foreign kids. But there was a little bit of an effect. It's a really small effect, depending on the location they were choosing from. So they donated the most to their own. They donated the most money to their own country when given the China option, but the most to the foreign kids in the Africa option, basically. So these differences aren't really that big. Like there's basically no effect here. Then there's really small differences, but there's still a little bit of difference between these options. Okay, and finally, the last hypothesis for the replication section is the most complicated. I'm going to spend a bit of time to talk about the setup to this question. So the question that the authors of the original book chapter, Alban and Szymanska, they posed that if both a tax, which they called a forced charity, and an actual charity can both help others, then technically there's no difference, right? Because if a tax does something and the charity also does something, then there shouldn't be a difference between the two. And they think that, well, if both of these can help others, then would participants prefer the voluntary version, the donations version over tax? So there are 5 different sets of items that we presented to participants, and this question had a slightly different setup. So we averaged the responses over 4 questions that the original authors posed. So we have 2 cases, a tax case and a charity case. And we asked them, which one would you favor, which is more fair, which has more freedom of choice, and which one's more important. So they framed that taxes would have a fair cost allocation because everybody would be paying for the same tax, instead of charities where some people would be paying and some people wouldn't. And the other version, the voluntary version, would provide people with the freedom of choice whether they want to donate to a cause or not. So we did replicate this. All 5 items were found to have an effect in the correct direction. But the problem was that when I was doing the post hoc ANOVA test, we found that one question in particular stood out. The question which asked whether the tax version or the charity version had more freedom of choice. But it didn't come to me when I was doing the original replication, but once I looked at the results, it felt kind of obvious that the charity version would have more freedom of choice, which is kind of the whole point of the manipulation. So perhaps this question should have been a manipulation check or a comprehension check instead, because the whole point of the question is that you want to choose a fair cost allocation or freedom of choice more, in which case the whole point is that the charity version is freedom of choice, right? So I ran this study again. Basically, I ran the stats for these 5 questions and removed the question regarding freedom of choice. I ran it again. So after this question was removed, suddenly 4 of the 5 versions suddenly just became not significant at all. And there were 5 versions, and the 5th one was still significant, but I think I can explain that one off to political factors. So the last version asked participants about an epidemic. So the question was, a new epidemic disease threatens to infect 10% and kill 1% of the children in your nation. And it only can be cured by a treatment that costs too much for people to pay for and that they needed additional funds. And participants were given a choice between an income tax increase to pay for the treatment and voluntary donations to pay for the treatment. So this one still came out significant in favor of donations, but yeah, we also gave them responses, qualitative responses, basically a text box to give us feedback. And participant feedback looked like this. Basically, they didn't think it was fair to raise taxes on everyone, especially when a disease has a low death rate. But I think it's quite arguable that 1% of children dying in your own country isn't a low death rate. That's like one kid in every grade, right? Yeah. So my guess is that this is not actually like per se an effect caused by people actually wanting freedom of choice, but it's actually more due to an effect of medical populism, which is basically a political effect that happened in some countries in the West a few years ago due to the COVID pandemic. And I guess that the COVID pandemic relates to this more than basically an aversion to having to choose taxes instead. So I think that there might be some sort of interaction effect here, and this doesn't actually answer the question of whether forced charity as a bias even exists. So the other four versions were about widgets, basically foreign workers, and also other questions that weren't related to like medical opinions like this. So my guess is that I'm not really sure after running everything if forced charity as a bias even exists. And this is one of the big holes in the study. I would encourage others to kind of figure out if this is even like the whole concept of forced charity, is this even actually a thing or not? Okay. So on to the extension hypotheses. So we took the original study, the replication hypotheses, the 5 of them, and then we tacked on 2 extra extensions. So this is a one about reputation. So we gave, again, like the previous studies, we gave the participants 2 choices, A and B, and we told them that A publishes the names of donors and how much money they donated on their website, while B keeps their donors anonymous. But in every other aspect, these 2 are the same. So my hypothesis is going into this extension, because this is like an original question. So my hypothesis was that being provided with the means to increase your own reputation would actually provide an incentive towards choosing A over B, because hey, it's just on their website, right? You don't have to kind of like shout it out from like the mountains of Twitter and tell everybody that, hey, I donated money, look at me, I'm so cool. But it's just posted on their website so that other people can see. So this should, even if there isn't an effect in the direction of reputation, there shouldn't be a direct significant effect towards anonymity, right? But yeah, so people actually prefer staying anonymous when donating, when the question was posed to them like that. We found an effect in the opposite direction of our hypotheses. People actually preferred to stay anonymous. And you can see that about over 30% of participants that we asked, they wanted to stay anonymous when donating instead of having their names published. So the average allocation was about 65%. And this is really surprising, because throughout my literature review, I found either no effect or a negative effect of anonymity on donating money. So this came as a really, really big surprise to me. And to be honest, I'm still not sure where this comes from, but I think this is quite an important finding, because, well, it really shows that just because the literature review suggests that something might be true, it doesn't always mean that you might run into the same answer when you do an extension like this. But what's interesting is that participants did see this question as a manipulation of reputation. So there wasn't like an effect of people seeing this question and thinking something else in relation to reputation. So one of the answers, one of the qualitative responses that the participants gave, one of them actually said, I would prefer to have my praises sung by angels than by men. So you can really see that, I could really see through the responses that they really did want to stay anonymous through the qualitative responses that they gave. So the manipulation worked. It's just that my assumption about how they would feel was just completely wrong and in the wrong direction as well. Okay. So the last extension is about overhead costs. So this is more of a conceptual replication of a previous article, and which found that people really don't like to pay for admin costs when they're donating money to other people. So they see that there's a type of administrative overhead to a donation, and they'll feel, oh, I don't really want to donate to a charity with a high overhead. So this study basically found that there would be a way to kind of trick people into donating more. And the whole concept is, what if we tell donors that another donor will pay for the admin cost of your donation, making their own donation completely overhead free? So this is what the main graph of their study, which found that people would actually prefer to donate to charities with a certain amount of overhead, from about 5 to 50 here. You can see that there's a gap between these two lines. When the overhead was covered by another charity instead, by another donor instead. So what this graph says is that when participants are told that another donor would cover the overhead costs of a certain donation, they would actually prefer that option more instead of having it not covered. So what this study was basically done between as a between subject study. So they had one group where they didn't give them the overhead choice, and one group where they didn't give them the overhead choice. So we ran this as like a conceptual replication, which we changed the study into running as a within subjects. So we gave the same participant the choice between an overhead and a no overhead version. So this is the item we posed to our participants. So for two different charities, A and B, they both spend 50% of the donations they receive on administrative costs, which I guess is a bit high. So for each $100 contribution to A, $50 will go to helping children, and $50 will go to cover admin costs, which is kind of the definition of what's happening here. But for a $100 contribution to B, all $100 will go directly to helping children with zero overhead, because another donor will cover the corresponding $100 administrative cost of their contribution. So basically, we're doing a little rearranging game where we kind of shift over the overhead to another donor instead, and see if people actually prefer B more, even though technically the $100 cost due to the other donor covering the corresponding $100 is actually helping the same amount of children as the one in A. So we have this extension, and we see that this trick actually works on the participants, even though we just blatantly present the whole trick to our participants, and they still fall for it. And we can see that we have about a 67% donation to B, the charity with the overhead trick, and we can see that about 30% of participants actually go all in and say then, hey, if overhead is being covered by another donor, then I'm going all in for it. And that's basically the whole study. So our conclusions for this study are that we took a particularly influential book study in effective altruism, and we successfully replicated all of them. And we mostly validated the original studies, except for the last replication hypothesis about forced charity. That one came about a bit weirdly, but yeah. And as for the extensions, one followed our hypotheses and one went in the completely opposite direction. And that, well, yeah, that's a quick summary. And as for further directions, we've only included a pretty small range of biases in the study, actually. So we can, what's good about this study that some of the students in 305 are doing right now, psychology in Philly's class, are that we can see that these items can really easily be sought out for others. So to have, if you have another possible manipulation that you come up with, you can easily just like kind of take the study and then just swap the questions out really quickly, and you can run that as well. And it would also be very easy to modify it to run between group versions. So due to easy randomization variables in online platforms, you can really easily split a participant group into two and run perhaps a direct replication of the overhead aversion study and modify it to run between groups instead of within groups, which is what this whole study is about, basically. So I'm going to go into talking about registered reports. So what registered reports is actually not really complicated. In short, it's basically a normal study split into two. So we have first a plan, and the plan itself goes into peer review. Then we do the actual study itself based on the approved plan, and then we do another round of peer review. So in short, we first submit a full plan of what we're going to do, including every single analysis that we basically promised to run, and set this up as a pre-registration and hand it in for peer review. And the study only begins when this approved plan is accepted, and the final paper happens after for that. So this is how my study ran. So basically, we prepared a sort of a little one-page snapshot of what our study was going to look like, with a few details on what exactly we were interested in, and we submitted a snapshot to PCIRR, which went through two processes at the same time. So we started to. I started to write the plan for the thesis, while PCIRR started to acquire reviewers, and reviews for a scheduled date, which at the time I did it was about 6 weeks. And after that, I submitted the manuscript, and which came back, and there were 2 rounds of reviews. So after 2 rounds of reviews, I had an approved plan, and we could start running the study. So this particular registered reports community is PCIRR is a platform of researchers which provides free peer reviews for registered reports. So the thing about this community in particular is that after stage 2 peer review, basically, a recommendation is given, and there are a list of PCIRR friendly journals which take this recommendation as peer review and will not argue to you about, hey, whether this study is important, or if this study is timely, or they won't actually, we promise not to relitigate any of the scientific elements of this study, as these were judged in stage 1, which is the stage before the study happens. And I'll be talking about a bit about what I went through. So these are some practical considerations for what I think are good about and bad about running theses, especially undergraduate theses for myself as a PCIRR study. So I think there are really good aspects about this, and in that the best thing I took away from this whole thesis was that I could really learn good research methods, because you actually promise to run a specific set of analyses and studies before you actually start doing it. It really reduces the probability of picking up through other researchers, or just by inventing yourself some questionable research methods, such as like p-hacking, cherry picking, and other such methods, because you've already promised to do a set of studies. So you can't take the results back and look at your results and say that, hey, these are not significant, I'll just cut them away from my study. You can't do that. You have to report every single variable that you ran, and if there's anything that you change, you have to report it, and people can easily check that you've changed something between you planning the study and you actually doing the study. So people can actually see that, and there's lots of transparency, in which case you will not be perhaps pressured, or you won't have the motivation to do things like p-hacking, because you won't have the space to do so, because everything's out in the open. You've already promised to do this. You can't just suddenly swap and do something else. And running theses as PCIRR, especially because a thesis is probably one of the first research projects like an undergraduate student will work upon, is actually a really good way to make sure that from the first article they do as a first author, they won't be able to like do some shady stuff like this. Another thing is that I think it really helps others in the field see your work as it happens and recommend improvements really quickly. So if like normal studies, you have your whole article and you give it to a journal for peer review, but that doesn't really, they won't really be able to see it happen as it goes along. So if there are problems with the study as set up, then somebody else from the community will be able to immediately see your study and realize that something is happening here. Perhaps you shouldn't be doing XYZ analysis. You probably should be doing something else. And it can actually, I think, save a lot of time and effort spent with everyone, because people can immediately know something's up once you give the first draft of your plan. And it can help you as a person in a university. Perhaps you're just studying in a university, you don't have any connections, or you don't know many professors or other contacts in the community. And this can give like sort of first taste into what other people also expect from you as a future researcher, instead of perhaps what just one professor or just one lecturer is telling you. And it can also give you yourself a more wide perspective on what other people in the field are also doing. And another good thing about PCIRR is that it really reduces the amount of worrying about the results that you might get. So you don't need to worry about being rejected by journal, perhaps because you ran a study and everything came out not the way you wanted it to. So you don't have to worry that much about being like rejected for a journal because you didn't have a significant result, or the results weren't what you expected, but you are actually you won't have to argue with perhaps a journal board that your study is significant, because you've already done that before the study happened. So there's no taking back and saying that, hey, we don't want this anymore after the study is run, basically. But I think, to be honest, that there are still some aspects of theses that are kind of not so good compared to normal ones, because firstly, there is a higher skill barrier, I suppose, because one aspect of a PCIRR is that it requires everything to be open. You need open code. You need to have everything in a place like perhaps scircsiv or OSF, and just being able to understand perhaps what you're doing with reproducible code removes a layer of abstraction. You can't just dump everything into like SPSS and to Excel, or maybe just click a few buttons and have the results pop up at you. You actually need to know exactly what you're doing. And I don't think like many of my classmates, they aren't really that able or willing to commit to such academic rigor. Like they will just want to take up SPSS that they learned from class, dump all of their data in by Control-C, Control-V, and then just run the studies without having to think that much about how do I present this code, or perhaps this like Jamovi or R code, to the wider community, and having them understand what you're doing. So there's a technical, there is a skill barrier that I myself had to spend quite a lot of time to actually learn what was happening. And some students really don't have that sort of motivation to really dig that deep, and they just want to do a thing and get over with it, right? And I think specifically for theses, the other thing is that there are tighter deadlines, because you are relying on outside peer review. You are getting other people to review your work. So you can't run on your own timeline. You can't just get the data and then just sit in your room and do your thesis for 3 straight days. That doesn't work. You have to fit to external deadlines. And because they are so dependent on outside peer review, deadlines are a lot more inflexible. So if something pops up like a personal emergency, you can't just like take a break for a week and then just start, because you do have to follow like strict deadlines, and that does make it that does make timelines more tight, especially because normal theses are run about maybe 6 to 9 months, and that isn't really a lot of time between waiting for peer reviews to come back to get working on something, and that does add a layer of pressure to everything. But in conclusion, I do think that it's really worth it to run theses as PCRR, even though there are these cons, because having this sort of learning experience for me is like a lot more important than than the skill barrier, because I guess the way the community of psychology is moving right now, then this is something that everybody will have to pick up anyway. So yeah, this is overall like positive for me. And it's not just me that's saying that. There are studies from PCRR right now that find that there are considerable amounts of people who do say that like a study, when run as pre-registration, basically you get the part where you give the plan to peer review first before actually doing it. This actually does increase their understanding of open research practices. So it's not just a me thing, it does exist. Yeah. And yeah, that's about it for today. Thank you.
Thanks for the presentation. It's very interesting for me the first time to hear like your perspective, because we never really talked about things, right?
Sure.
Yeah. And everything that you like put under cons for me are like big pros. Like forcing you to do everything reproducible. Yes, let's do it. Tighter deadlines where you know exactly where everything is going to happen. Yeah, let's go for it. But I think what needs to be emphasized, and I think it's not maybe clear here, is that undergraduates can achieve publication within their 1 year undergraduate thesis. So this is a guaranteed publication based only on a plan. And then afterwards, once you complete the data collection, then you can choose any of the 30-something journals that support the community, which is a complete revolution. Has never happened in science before. It's only something that started the last 2 years, and Mannix was one of the first in the world to use peer community, and definitely one of the first in the world as an undergraduate to take part in this. This doesn't happen anywhere. So big achievement there. I'll let you ask if you have some questions. Do you want to pose anything? If not, we'll talk to the folks on Zoom. Anything? Yeah, please.
I was wondering, I don't know if you thought about, sorry. I don't know if you thought about that or were interested in that, but during your talk, one thing I was wondering about was whether you were also thinking about or looking at reasons or like estimations of cost effectiveness, because now you could easily manipulate that in your experiment. But I could imagine in real life donations already at this point would be very hard to estimate for most people, choosing between this many options that you have. And I guess there would also be a lot of biases that would influence this estimation. Probably it's not like so clear cut. Do you have any information on that or ideas?
So I think, well, in terms of the study, you could actually probably change the terms so that like individual manipulations would be easy to study. But I think that in a realistic sense, there are limitations to having a questionnaire because it obviously doesn't measure real life circumstances or real life setups. But I think the purpose of this would probably be more to identify individual biases more than actual real life case studies and realistic scenarios in which you're actually donating money, because there are some considerations of that. For example, the study about reputation. Like people might be very happy to claim that, oh, I want to be anonymous. I want to be, I don't want to have people know the good work I do because that may invalidate. But in a real life scenario, when given that, they might, choose the opposite way. So I think I think studies like these are a good way to kind of list out biases that might be possible in real life, but it's not supposed to be like a sort of this definitely does happen in real life sort of thing, but it's more like an example of what, when given the whole manipulation right there, what do people think about it, basically.
Thanks.
Actually, I have another question, and I also want to say that quite like, I really admire like, your research and like your initiative to really, implement open science, and, doing this sort of thesis is quite a big undertaking. And I'm really, amazed that you were able to do that just for a thesis, like undergrad, like within less than a year, presumably. So I just wanted to ask like more specifically about like the hypothesis on in-group effect, because like I noticed like for the extension hypothesis, like the second one that you did, you looked at overhead costs and like how like the administrative cost of it can be someone else like externally can pay for it. But then like say for the in-group effect, like I think the hypothesis was quite straightforward, and it was just, if you were to choose between, donating to like a charity or like initiative at your own country versus like worldwide, right? But then like, I think if it were like a worldwide initiative that you opt for, then inevitably there will always be like overhead costs as well. And I just don't know if that was, made more explicit for the original hypothesis.
Basically, it's like we have the hypotheses split by question. So for every single question, we explain in the beginning that every single one is their own comparison. So I'll just scroll back. This statement right here, unless otherwise specified, we actually added this sentence into the study. This wasn't in the original study, but we wanted to really make sure that they won't be looking at the thing about nationalism, and they won't wait, how about the overhead thing? So we put this here just to make sure, in bold, just to make sure that people will understand that, hey, this is a one-by-one comparison. You don't have to think about anything else, just this, and everything else is equally effective and efficient, except for the one thing that we want to ask you about, basically.
Yeah, I think that's a really good consideration. Like, especially, like you said, like there are many ways to really go about making a decision, and like kind of telling people to kind of like stop and like, stop considering other, potential kind of thoughts definitely helps with like kind of making that a bit more clear cut and like getting more of a firm answer. So I think that's good. Yeah. I think that you implemented
the interaction between in-group, out-group, and overhead costs, right?
Yeah.
To manipulate both of these at the same time, in order to make sure that they've really read this and addressed this, right? So it's a good point, because I was not thinking that maybe like out-group supporting people outside actually requires more money in order to do that. And we do want to see whether people process it that way. So we could add, like we're running in my courses. In my course, we are running a lot of replications of that and many other things. So it could be like interesting to try and manipulate this further. So it's a good comment. Thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit more about how you select participants? Because I noticed some of the questions asked about donating $1,000, presumably US dollars, or 10,000 US dollars.
Online, 1,400 participants online from basically online MTurk, I think, or was it Cloud Research? Basically, we had online workers that we gave a bit of money to fill in these questionnaires online but we filtered them so that all of the participants were over 18 adults from the United States. And it's basically just a convenience template, because we didn't really pick from a specific group of people, just people from the US overall who were interested in filling out the survey.
I see. Is there a rationale behind the amount of donation of $1,000 or $10,000?
They're just big round numbers to make people easier conceptualize. Well, I assume because this wasn't actually those $1,000 amounts weren't actually my setup. They were from the original authors. So my assumption is that those numbers were chosen to give the reader, like the participant, a really just a really easy number to settle upon. So it's not like a weird number like 37 or something that they might get stuck on, because that's actually another manipulation itself. I think there was one type of manipulation where giving somebody a weird number when asking for a donation can actually affect them and have them focus more on the request itself. So the big round number thing can actually avoid that sort of thing.
But it sounds like there's some concern that you want to address. So what are you thinking?
Yeah, because I think the numbers are quite big actually for donation. If you are talking to the general public, not a lot of people actually think about $1,000 donation or even $10,000 donation. In fact, they might think about this in the circumstances of, a legacy plan giving, in their will, if they're talking about that sum of money.
I guess it could be really abstract. But yeah, the original study kind of try to frame this as a sort of annual donation thing, like contribute some of your annual income to such causes. So the original manipulation was to kind of not just have this as not just a one-off thing, like perhaps more rich people might just think of $10 or whatever, I'll just donate it, right? But to have this annual income thing and having like a significant portion of your annual income, no matter what your original annual income is, kind of helps to reduce the amounts of effect between like the really in need people who might be given this question and like people who are just really like thrifty people and like people who are like just really loose with their money, I suppose.
I think one of my sort of question is if this doesn't match with their typical donation habits, it might introduce more cognitive demand of them trying to pattern match their own previous thinking rather than treating it as a logical question or logical exercise. In some way, equivalently, people do not make very logical financial decisions, even the numbers involved are higher. So I wonder if these numbers are too foreign to them, that it just causes them, just take them to a place that they are somehow using quick biases or heuristics to make quick decisions.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That.
Maybe the fact that we use like huge numbers like $10,000 might actually affect them to like think a lot more about the amounts involved and have them not have their like. Yeah, if you give them like $10, they might just use their usual processing heuristics, but what 10,000 they might stop and give a thought. So yeah, that might be one thing that we can investigate. Like if we change the values to like, hey, how about if we have the same question but $10, would the like balance be shift? Would the balance shift, or if like dollar amounts can affect how people perceive that? Yeah, I think that's probably a good future direction as well. Yeah.
So you have like a hypothesis, like if it's larger numbers, then what would happen? Small number.
I think perhaps if we frame that as it's part of their legacy giving, then it forces people to think more carefully about it in a logical way. But if they apply their typical, give $20 to this charity, then they go, okay, I should spread it out evenly, or
so apply some sounds more deliberate
contemplation, perhaps. Yeah.
And it was just a small side comment, because also how you verbalize it. Like, let's say 1%. I mean, thanks. You mentioned the 1% thing that you were a bit surprised because it's quite a lot actually. But I think it would make a huge difference if you put like 1 in 100 or something like that. Because I guess for people, it depends a bit on also maybe the educational level and a lot of other stuff. But I think that makes actually a huge difference how to frame it. At least we saw that in some of our studies. If we put it a bit different, I guess people would perceive it quite differently and maybe also answer your question quite differently.
Yeah. Like I guess one other thing that I might be able to do with the 1% question might be actually writing the number of people, children that you're killing. So writing that whole number out, and I think it might actually change the values a lot. Instead of writing 1% is a bit foreign, or like it feels like a small amount, but writing the actual number out might actually.
There's 10 children, then you're killing 0.1 children. Like that's kind of
it's
easier to so yeah.
Easier to process.
Do we include political orientation?
No, we didn't. We didn't have political orientation in there.
Yeah, but to have a bit more information on like the sample, as you also suggested, I think that would be super interesting. But of course, you can't do everything in one study. So
yeah, we are doing a follow-up, so we'll include the political stuff.
Yeah.
I was kind of curious if you have some thoughts about, because with these factors, we actually sometimes don't really know whether they're more effective or less effective. So for example, when anonymity, some people, I think, in effective altruism are saying to be anonymous is less effective because if you publicize this on social media, maybe others will follow. Other people will know about the cause, right? So do you have like any thoughts about how any of the other factors are associated in people's minds or in reality with effectiveness?
Oh, with reputation, I think that actually, I'll scroll back to the why do people donate slide, and you can see that the first one that they list is awareness of need. Are they aware that people need help? So even though you might bump one down, like reputation might be bumped down and this is bumped up, maybe they multiply together and it factors out. And it's actually that if you increase the name value, basically you give them the website code for the name and the money basically. So that actually might factor out for the charity in total to have them receive more money actually. But it's probably really dependent on what the type of reputation thing is. So because even though this is just publishing names of donors on their website instead of having like an Instagram sticker or what people do these days, and I guess like another sort of manipulation on reputation might actually give a different result. I'm not sure about that, but it might. There's lots of different factors. There are so many factors that I don't think it's really proper to say whether this will affect this or another because it's all intertied together. But being able to separate the effect of just one thing, reputation, and seeing this happen, I guess it's what I can say about all of this basically.
So maybe a final question because we're running out of time. You've spent a semester with me thinking about effective altruism. Then you've spent a whole thesis thinking about cognitive biases in effective altruism. Do you have like a summary perspective view of this whole thing about both effective altruism and maybe cognitive biases about effective altruism? Something you want to like summarize? What's your grand view on things?
The grand view, I think. That's too hard of a question. I'm just picking apart like specific.
Choose any
things.
aspect, yeah.
Yeah, just picking up individual aspects. Okay. But I do think that like I've read like there was this one really huge meta analysis of like a bunch of studies that I researched, but it's really disparate. Like there are it really just comes back to this. There are way too many factors that affect how people do a single action. And you can actually also tie these to different aspects of why people do things instead of just noticing why do people do stuff. And everything really just ties back into like a grand unified theory of psychology that obviously doesn't exist. And I really do think that this is just I'm just really able to like pinpoint out certain things, but how to wrap this up into a big into like a cohesive whole. Like how would I summarize this whole paper? I would just say it's a bunch of things. I can't really wrap this up into a proper, like can't fit into a box and tie a bow on it because it's just some different things that affect how people donate and how we can try to investigate other types of manipulations more.
Good. So maybe it's an opportunity for somebody to come in and see something bigger other than the smaller items, because there's not a lot of work done on this. So it's nice that you revisited one of the bigger, the impactful work that's out there. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you all for coming, and the people on Zoom. Looking forward to more work on effective altruism and meeting the Effective Altruism Hong Kong group. We'll post this on YouTube and the OSF for everybody else to see. Thank you.